Hi everybody, Greg Wade here. Today we're going to learn how to stencil your loaves. Let's get started. All right, when you're going to go stencil your bread, what you're going to need is first off a stencil. You can cut them out of thick cardstock like I do here. I use the Cricut Maker. You can also just use an X-Acto knife, and then this gives you a lot more creative control because you're actually making your own stencil, right? You can also go and pick something up like this at a hardware store. It's actually a grate that goes over a vent, but they got a couple different shapes and styles and stuff like that. So kind of interesting there, so you don't have to go and make your own. You're also going to need a lame, either a curved or a straight one. And then you're also going to need a way to put flour or cocoa powder on top of the loaf of bread. So what I like to do is just wrap up flour in cheesecloth and tie it like this. So when you shake it, it only gives you a very small amount of flour at a time so you don't overdust. You know, same thing with your cocoa powder, you can just dust it like this. And then I also keep a dry brush handy in case you want to try again, okay? So those are all the things that you need to get started. Okay, when I actually go to put the stencil on the loaf of bread, what I like to do first is with a dry brush, brush off any excess flour that may be stuck to it from the proofing process. Then position your stencil on the loaf of bread. And what you want to do is apply some pressure to the stencil in order to make it flat against the actual loaf, okay? If it is lifting up at all, what's going to happen is your lines are not going to look very clean because you're dusting from up here and then the flour is falling through and can disperse. If you hold it gently like this, you will have much cleaner lines. So you hold the stencil gently and then be dusting with your flour. Remember, a little bit less is more when it comes to stenciling. If you put too much on there, again, it can look kind of just dusty. And I'm just moving my fingers across the stencil in order to keep the stencil that I'm working on against the loaf of bread. Once I get to the very end, I gently lift straight up, okay? You don't want to be shifting at all, otherwise you'll run the risk of ruining your stencil. Okay, if you don't like what it looks like, just take a dry brush and brush it right off, okay? So that's just for a single stencil. What I can show you now is you can actually stencil twice. And what I'm going to do is take this metal one and I'm going to kind of bend it around the loaf of bread like this. And then I'm going to, again, I bake the bread a little bit dark. So when you think about what's going to happen here, I'm going to have dark colored crust. I'm going to have a pop of white with the flour like this, okay? So I'm just gently holding down the stencil against the loaf of bread and dusting lightly with the flour as you go. Okay? Now, you lift this straight up. So you've got this attractive pattern to start with, which looks really, really cool. So I'm gonna have the dark dough, I'm gonna have this light pattern, and now what I'm gonna do is just on the side of the loaf here, take another stencil with a little bit of cocoa powder. And then, again, lift straight up and out. So you're gonna have the light dough or the dark baked crust, that light stencil in the background, and then you're gonna have this really dark, accentuated stencil on top of that. Now, when you're going to score this loaf of bread, you want to accentuate the stencil, okay? So for this one, I'm not going to score straight through it, right? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna score around it. And this way, the whole stencil will then pop up and look really, really attractive. This one, you've got no choice but to go through the background stencil, but you want to accentuate this little stalk of wheat here, right? So what I'm gonna do, just score once right down the center, and this is gonna come up and out this way and have the stencil be accentuated. So again, I'm not cutting through it, I'm going to accentuate the stencil itself. So our stencil loaves are out of the oven. They're looking really, really good. So remember our boule, we did this star pattern on top of it. I think it turned out really, really clean. And the way that we scored it accentuates the stencil itself, right? Because we're going around it, and then it's able to kind of have this background where we pop. And then with our batard, we've got our background of our white pattern from the regular flour, and then we've got the stenciled wheat with the cocoa powder. Turned out really clean. All right, these are our stenciled loaves. They turned out great. I hope you're able to express yourselves a little bit more creatively with your baking, and happy baking.